This happened to me back when I was around 10. I remember a lot of it because it was terrifying, but some of the details are gone. At the time, my mom was a single parent. My dad wanted nothing to do with me, I assume because I didn't even know he ever existed. Then my mom had another kid with a different guy and they split up. My mom was the only one that worked though. I remember he always stayed home with me and my stepbrother until they split up. When he moved out, he would take my stepbrother with him, but said I wasn't his responsibility, so I was left by myself at times. It usually wasn't long, so I would walk to the back door, let myself in, and wait an hour or so for my mom to get home. This would change though on holiday breaks, like Christmas or spring break. My mom didn't have anyone nearby that could watch me and didn't have the money to pay for a babysitter, so I would be left alone for 6 to 8 hours by myself. I was given rules though. I was not to answer the door for anyone because she would have a key and wouldn't knock. I was not allowed to answer the phone except at certain times. She would call at exact times and would answer by saying, "It's Mama," before I would talk, so I knew it was her. And since we had thick curtains, they were to stay closed at all times. Other than that, it was the whole no touching the stove or microwave rules, of course. She made sure I had plenty of accessible foods that didn't involve cooking, like pre-made sandwiches, Lunchables, juice, things like that. I didn't really think much of it other than, okay, I get to play, eat, and sleep as much as I want, and that was the end of it. So this took place when I was home alone on spring break. My mom prepped my lunch, went over the rules again, and left, locking the door behind her. I had my breakfast while watching cartoons, and that probably took an hour or two because, I'm a child, so I was easily amused. After a while, I went back to my room to grab some toys to bring them to the living room to play with while I continued to watch TV. That made up most of my day. Sometimes I would get out my coloring stuff or give my toys a bath. I had these colorful soaps and I always wanted to use them. So I would do that in the bathroom sink. Anyways, one of those days I was playing and I decided I needed flowers. I think my dolls were getting married or something like that. I don't quite remember. I was going to color flowers, but then I couldn't cut them out because I wasn't allowed to use the scissors while I was alone. So I decided I would go pick the flowers in our yard. I thought I would go out the back door, pick a few flowers, then quickly run back in. That way no one would even know. So off I went to pick some flowers. But then I thought I needed some dirt to put the flowers in, so I ran back in to get a cup to put dirt in it. As I was filling the cup, I noticed the neighbor next door was outside watering her flowers, and she noticed me too. She waved and smiled at me, and since I wasn't supposed to be outside, I just smiled and quickly ran back inside. I thought it was a pretty smooth move at the time, as no one ever came over or called, and my mom never found out about it either. So the days continued on as normal from there until a few days later. I was playing in my room when I decided I needed rocks. Look, kids' imaginations are crazy. I specifically wanted the rocks we had out front because they were flat and smooth. I was going to make them into some kind of structure again for my dolls. So, as I had done before, I would run out there, make sure no one was around this time, grab a few rocks, and go back in. I opened the door and looked around, and no one was there. So I grabbed my little purse and walked out to start gathering some rocks. While I was leaning over picking out rocks, I heard the gate open. It was metal, so it had a squeak to it whenever you moved the handle. I looked up to see a woman that was not my mom coming in. She smiled and started to say something to me, so I immediately ran to the door, shouted, "Mom," to make it seem like I wasn't alone, shutting the door and locking it. The lady then walked up to the door and knocked, and I just laid still on the couch, waiting for her to leave. After a few more knocks, she finally left. I peeked through the curtain to see her get in a car that I didn't even notice in the driveway and drive off. I thought I cut it close on that one, so I told myself I wouldn't go back out, no matter what. However, I didn't even have to do that. While eating my lunch the next day, there was a knock on the door. I was scared that it was the same lady coming back, so I sat still waiting for her to eventually leave. After a few more minutes and not hearing any more knocks, I proceeded to peek around the curtains to see if she left when I was greeted to her face, trying to look in as well. I nearly screamed when I saw her, but I think I scared her too. It was definitely the same lady though. She motioned to the door, and being caught at this point, I thought, what choice do I have? I remember feeling like I was just caught doing something I wasn't supposed to be, so the only option I had was to confess. I opened the door, and she said she wanted to talk to my mom. She looked like a nice lady though. I remember she was wearing a dress or a skirt with a vest over it, and she had her hair pulled back like my mom. In fact, she reminded me a lot of my mom, which at least made me feel a little better. I told her my mom was busy though and couldn't come to the door. That's when she started laying into me. She said, "Are you sure she's home? You're not lying to me, are you?" I told her no and that she was in the shower. She then pushed her way past me into the house and said she would wait for her to get out. I again told her she couldn't because I wasn't supposed to answer the door while she was in the shower. So she turned to scaring me. She said that she knew I was lying to protect my mom because I wasn't supposed to be alone. This, of course, caused me to be more alert because I was just hearing that I was going to be in trouble. She said that she was there to arrest my mom for leaving me home alone, and I started crying. She started asking more questions about when she would be home, and the crying got louder and uglier until I was begging her not to arrest my mom. She said she wouldn't arrest her if I went with her instead, and then my mom could pick me up when she got off work. I thought if I could keep my mom from getting in trouble because, let's face it, I had messed up, then I would do it. So I agreed to go with her. She told me I could take my backpack with whatever I wanted in it, so I ran to my room, grabbed my favorite doll and book, and we headed out the front door. I was still very scared and sad, thinking I was going to get in trouble when my mom picked me up. When I got to her car, I began to wonder how my mom was going to know where we were, so I asked her if we should call her so she knew. That was probably her mistake though. She was opening the back door when I asked this, and she very quickly and dismissively said something like, "She's not gonna know because you're not coming back. She's a bad mom." So I started crying again, and I was even more scared. I don't remember what all I said, but I do know I was nearly screaming, bawling, and pleading with her to let me stay and see my mom again. She kept telling me to shut up and get in the car, and that's when the old lady next door came out. She was waving and smiling, and she was asking what was going on here as she walked closer. The woman started to become irritated at this point, saying she was taking care of me since there were no adults in the house. The old lady was smooth as can be though, and responded with something like, "Now, Katie, I told you I would be right back, didn't I?" I was confused and still crying, so all I could muster was an apology. She then explained to this woman that she was watching me but had to run back home to get something, and then she apologized for leaving me alone. I don't know what she did, but this woman then let go of me and shoved me at the neighbor and said she would be back if I was ever caught alone again. I stood next to her as we watched the woman drive away and nearly burn out of the driveway. Once she was gone, she asked me if I was okay and suggested I go back home. I started running back home when I noticed she was following behind me and up to the front door. Right before I was going to shut it, something told me to let her in and that I was going to be safe, so I invited her in. She then told me that I was okay and I could go play, and she would wait there for my mom to get home. I made my way to my room, and after laying on my bed for a few, I could hear her talking. I looked out of my room to see her talking on her home phone, so I went back to my room and I think I actually fell asleep. Obviously, something like that can wear a kid out. When my mom got home, though, it was another whole scene. I woke up to my mom gently shaking and rubbing my arm and crying. She then hugged me and apologized, and so did I. As you may have guessed, that lady was definitely not with CPS or anything of the likes. The neighbor, Barb, had caught on that I was home alone, so when she saw me out, she was just making sure that I was okay. She noticed the lady that came over the first day, but since she left, she didn't think much of it. But when she showed up the next day in her same ugly, beat-up car, not looking like an official vehicle in any way, she felt like something was wrong. And when she saw me crying while walking to the car, she felt the need to confront the situation. When we got back inside, she found the paper with my mom's number and called her to let her know what happened, and my mom came home shortly after that. I don't think my mom ever reported it though, because she was worried if anything would be done about her leaving me home, so we just never saw her again and hoped we never would either. However, Barb did start watching me after that. She came over to our place so I could still play with my stuff, and everything went fine from there on. Barb has been part of our family since. She said I reminded her of her own granddaughter that she rarely got to see since they lived on the other side of the country now, and was glad to have company since she lived alone. I was, and still am, incredibly thankful for her being so watchful over me, even when I never talked to her, because that could have saved my life. Who knows what that woman was planning to do with me that day. This story took place back when I was in college. I had a lot of friends that liked to party, and while I wasn't the type that liked to drink or do stupid things, I was the type to make sure my friends got to and from the party responsibly. Basically, I was their designated driver. I would drive them to the parties, sit around and drink soda until they were drunk off their asses, then drive them back home. It may sound like an incredibly boring way to spend your college years, but I honestly had a lot of fun with it. I'm not an incredibly social person myself, so just kind of sitting around and watching people make themselves look like idiots was my idea of a fun Friday night. This situation occurred at one party that was particularly rowdy and had a lot of people I didn't know, which usually happened when the parties were off campus. I was there and sitting in the corner with my Dr. Pepper and talking with another girl that was completely trashed. She and I were having a conversation about my education, something that she seemed way more interested in that she should have been, when one of my friends comes over to me and asks if I can take one of his friends home, and was insistent that it was just down the street. I usually don't play DD with people that I don't personally know, but I also didn't want this guy struggling to get home if he needed the ride. I reluctantly agreed and said that as long as my friend was vouching for him and that it wasn't too far from the party, I would take him home. I got up and followed him out to the front door, and he shouted to some guy named Greg, telling him that I would take him home. They said their drunken goodbyes, and I walked over to my car, which I should add was a late 90s Dodge Caravan. After they were done talking and telling each other how much they would miss each other, Greg walked over and smiled at me, asking if this was the car. I told him that this was the one and got in the driver's seat. He, for some reason, opened the sliding door and hopped into one of the back seats. I was curious, but if there's one thing you don't ask a drunk person you're taking home, it's why they chose to do mundane things. He gets buckled in and I pull into the road and then ask him where he's headed. He tells me an address that was 5 blocks down the way, literally a straight shot from only a few minutes away. As drunken people often do, he starts rambling about random things. He tells me that his name was Gregory and that he was named after his grandfather. He tells me about a dog he used to have as a child named Bucky and how much he missed him. He then tells me about his sister and how she runs a beauty salon in New Mexico and how he and his mother never really got along. This guy is seriously telling me his whole life story within the span of 1.5 miles. I pull up to where he wanted to go and let him know that we were at his house, just in case he didn't realize it, and he just kind of sits there and stares at nothing. After a few seconds of really awkward silence, he literally starts to cry. Out of nowhere, he tells me that he's sorry. I have no idea why he's sorry, and I tell him that he doesn't need to be. After sobbing for a few moments, he tells me that I was the nicest person he'd met and that he was going to miss all this. Once again, I'm just sitting here silently and he's telling me how much he's going to miss everything out here. Then he tells me why he's going to miss it. He drops in with, "I'm about to go to prison for a really long time." I just kind of sat there and nodded. He, of course, continues, "I made a mistake and accidentally assaulted my ex-girlfriend, so I have to go to court tomorrow, and I'm going to go away for a long time." As he finished telling me about what he did to her, he starts to chuckle and stare at me in the rearview mirror. He smiles and tells me that I kind of remind him of his ex, and that he hated her. After a few more moments, he shrugs and tells me that he appreciated the ride and that we should go get lunch when he gets out of prison. I just agreed and nodded along until he got out and got to his door. As soon as he entered his house, I let out a huge sigh of relief. The entire time he was staring at me and telling me about what he'd done, I felt like I was holding my breath. This was the last time that I gave anyone a ride that wasn't one of my immediate friends, and I hope I literally never meet Gregory ever again. My family isn't really huge on get-togethers or gatherings, with literally 2 exceptions: Thanksgiving and Easter. On Thanksgiving, we typically have all of the family over to my grandmother's house, which includes those of us that are out of state. Easter is a bit different though. It's usually just those of us that are nearby, mostly immediate family, but we typically reserve one of the party areas at a local park. Since where we live has a perfect spring every year, we've pretty much always had our Easter parties outside at the park, and it typically goes pretty well. We're always respectful to the people nearby. We clean up after ourselves, and we try our best to not be too loud. We've actually had a few times where we would just invite people that were at the park over and have some food if they were interested. We always make too much, and even if you're not family, we'd prefer to spread some positivity and joy to others. Most of the time, this will result in some awkward looks, and once the people realize that we're being genuine, they come over and get to know us. There have been a few times where things went a bit south, and one specific event that actually almost ruined the tradition for us, which is what this story is about. This happened back in 2017, which would have been April 16th of that year. I remember this because it was actually 2 days before my 20th birthday, so I was 19 at the time. We had prepared for the same Easter festivities as we had every year, bought the food we needed, made sure everyone was going to be there, and we made absolutely sure that we had the park's party area reserved. I don't really know what they call it, but it's like a gazebo by the pond. This park is very specific about reservations with large parties using this area, and they actually require a $50 deposit for it, which basically reserves your date. We paid it, got the paper that showed we had it reserved, and we were ready to go. The day arrived, and we got all of our food prepared and headed up to the park as a family. While we were a decent-sized group, we aren't a huge one. The group on this date was myself, my 3 siblings, my parents, my grandparents, and then my aunt and uncle on my mom's side with their 2 kids, a grand total of 12 adults, 16 people counting my nieces and nephews. We all got there and got our stuff ready to take out to the gazebo when we noticed that there was a group of around 6 or so people sitting there and eating as a group. No big deal, really. It looked like they were just eating their lunch together, which honestly meant that they would likely be going elsewhere pretty quick. We all decided to go ahead and head over to set up, and we would inform them that we had it reserved. As we approached, I could tell that at least one of the people wasn't happy seeing a large group approaching them. For the record, the gazebo has a few tables under it, so we weren't crowding them in or pushing them out. We were just loading our stuff to the back end and setting up on the other table. After we got all of our stuff loaded onto the gazebo, my uncle very politely informed the people sitting there that we had the spot reserved and asked them if they would be much longer because we were going to get set up for the party. Most of the group seemed to be okay with what was going on, if not annoyed, and they said they were just about to leave. But the older man of the group was visibly unhappy with it, and the same one that was rolling his eyes at us as we approached. The rest of them got up, but he just stayed there and retorted to my uncle's statement that you couldn't reserve the gazebo. It was first come, first serve. My uncle told him that that was incorrect and pulled a copy of the reservation letter from his pocket, saying that we had paid for the spot so we could all have our get-together here. He mentioned to the man that they were free to join us and have food when it was all done, but in the nicest way he could, told them to leave until then. The man threw a few expletives our way and told us where to shove our food, but then got up and walked away, all the while calling us names and just being a brash individual. I get that he was upset, but we had reserved it, and it wasn't like we just called the police or park rangers or whatever and had them removed. My uncle was nice about it and even invited them back when it was all done, but he had asked them to leave so we could have some time as a family. Obviously, this isn't where this all ended, though. It should have been, but we all kind of thought that this guy was going to be rude and just walk away from the situation, which is what pretty much happened at first. We got the table set up. My uncle, dad, and grandpa were over at the grill making food and chatting. I was sitting with my nieces and nephews and chatting it up with them as much as they wanted me to, and everyone else was just having a good time with the family. After a few minutes, my sister motioned for me to look up, and when I did, I saw the rude guy and another man walking back to the trail towards the gazebo. With how it was set up, you could see anyone walking up to the party area, and there was no way that they could be going somewhere else. The trail was basically a dead end that led to where we were. I shook my head and just kind of thought, maybe he's here to apologize. Maybe he realized he was rude. But of course, that's not how things went. As they approached, my uncle and my father looked up and asked if they could help them, basically just cutting to the chase. The rude guy basically started shouting about how my uncle and our family had violated his constitutional rights by kicking him out of a public place. I'm not joking. This guy said it was unconstitutional for us to use a public park's party area that we had paid for and reserved for this day. My uncle stared at him and basically laughed at his comment. He told him that we had reserved the space, we had paid, we had signed a document that allowed us to be there, and that we hadn't even kicked him out, just asked him if they would leave for a bit and come back later. My uncle is a super calm and collected man, as evidenced by his response to the man's earlier aggression, and he was pretty clearly done with this crazy man's BS. This is where things started to get crazy. The second man approached my uncle and started shoving him, basically saying that he was going to beat the hell out of him, and my uncle was attempting to de-escalate the situation. This guy wasn't interested in de-escalation and started to grab at my uncle, which caused my dad to try and intervene. And pretty quickly, it was a 4-man fight with my uncle, father, and the 2 men all scuffling over this stupidity. It hit its peak when the man that was fighting my uncle ended up getting the upper hand on him, and he actually slammed his face against the grill. All I could hear was my uncle screaming in pain, which caused everything and everyone else to go silent and stare at the situation. I think the guy realized that this minor fight had quickly escalated to potential permanent injury, and that he was about to get into major legal trouble. Thankfully, being in a public park, there were other people around, and someone had called the police already, so by the time the 2 men had attempted to get away, the cops were already pulling up. It was insane to me that a family get-together had turned into a quick fight, significant injury, and my uncle in an ambulance with major burns on part of his face within less than 5 minutes. Like, the entire feeling of the day shifted hard in an instant, because this guy was upset that we wanted to use the area that we had reserved. Obviously, he was arrested. They both were, and the cops took statements from the entire family. We packed up and took everything home and decided that we would just eat at my grandma's house later. None of us wanted to eat anyways, with my uncle in the hospital. He actually did recover for the most part, but has a gridiron-looking scar to the side of his eye where the grill seared into his skin. And my uncle, being my uncle, he likes to make jokes about it and how he now knows what it feels like to be a steak. Thankfully, this didn't dissuade us from having our Easter get-togethers at the park, and we actually have it reserved in a couple of weeks this Easter. So that, my friends, was another creepy story collection. And what a time for them, right? Spring, you got the pretty tulips and daffodils blooming, all the migratory birds making their way over, and it's starting to get to that perfect temperature. And then you get the creepy strangers showing up at your door, ruining your plans at the park. Was this supposed to be part of it? I don't know. Why do people have to be weird and just ruin the fun for everybody? Why can't we just make some cheesy joke and think, wow, that was really stupid of me, I'm gonna move on? But nope, we just gotta keep going with it, I guess. I hope you guys don't have to experience things like these people did in these stories. But I do appreciate them sharing their experiences with us so that the rest of us hopefully won't have to experience this. Hopefully. Anyways, if you did enjoy the video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing. But if you are already subscribed, don't hit that button. We will both be sad. And lastly, don't forget to leave a comment on your thoughts. Which story did you like or didn't like, I suppose? I don't know the correct way of saying that, right? And are you doing anything fun this spring that doesn't involve being one of the weirdos in these stories, hopefully? Please don't be those weirdos in the stories. In the meantime, friends, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. And until next time, take care.